And we'll begin in just a few minutes. Bezam, I'm going to make you the co-host. If you have any questions or anything popping up, you can direct message Bezam and she will help you out. Okay. Making sure we get our replay situated. Right, I think we're good to go. Bueno. Okay. So let's pull up our chat. Hello, hello. I see Craig. I see Sylvia. Welcome. Nice to see you there. If you'd like to share your name and where you're coming from in the chat, I'd love to know who's here. Also, if you are working on your student course, whatever course it is that you purchased or that you're currently working through, if you'd like to share that as well, that lets me know more or less, where everybody's at in their studies and in their journey. So for anyone that might be new here or joining me for the first time, I'm Brianna. And it is my mission to help spiritually minded high achievers build secure, soulfully loving relationships. And these live calls are really intended to be a space for us to dive deep into our questions, explore our relationship patterns, and give you some real-time guidance on what you might be learning. So for my returning students, just a quick reminder that we do these sessions twice a month, typically on the first and third Thursday of the month, although that can change. And so the updated calendar is available inside your student dashboard. So if you have Google, I do recommend adding the schedule to your Google Calendar because any notifications or changes will be immediately sent to you to your email. If you ever need to submit a question in advance, and I recommend that you do, the link to that is inside your student dashboards. You'll find all this information in your course introductory section, as well as in the module for live events and replays, which you all have access to. All of my students have access to this. Additionally, all of the replays are stored inside the module, inside your student dashboard for live events and replays. And if you miss anything, you can always catch it later. Okay. So during these calls, I will prioritize pre-submitted questions, and then I will create intentional pauses between questions to try to address what's coming up for those of you that are here in the live space. If I don't get to your question today and you submitted one in advance, it gets bumped to the top of my list the next time we meet. Okay. And as I go, please feel invited to type your questions, comments, or reflections in the chat so that I can acknowledge it when we do take those pauses. So today the questions we're going to be exploring, what does it mean to have a fluid identity? How can I stop questioning my partner's affections even when they demonstrate care? My avoidant messages inconsistently after a conflict, what does that mean? How should you tell someone that they are avoidant? How long before an avoidant partner comes back? How to know when it's healthy to break the no contact rule? How do secure partners respond to avoidant behavior? Is there a relationship between avoidant attachment and substance use issues? How to approach passive aggression at work? How can I reconnect with a romantic interest who has been abroad for months? Okay. So we're going to get to as many of these as we can today. And again, I'd love it if you'd drop a name and where you're coming from in the chat and any lessons you might be working through. Okay, I see we have California, welcome, Florida, San Diego. That's great. Okay, yes, if you submitted questions in advance, I'm going to try to address them here. If you can submit them 24 hours prior to the call, that's better because that means I will have seen it. If I don't get to it today, we will get to it in the next live call. All right, so with that, I'm just going to dive into our questions for today. And again, please feel free to type your thoughts and reflections as we go, and I will take a moment to acknowledge them in the chat. So the first question is about identity fluidity. So let's read the question. I deeply appreciate your work, especially insights on parts work. So this is referring to inner child work, more or less. One of the terms you use is identity fluidity, and that stuck with me. but I haven't found a lot of content on it. I'd love to hear more thoughts on this topic. I've also been reflecting on guard energy and how that manifests in my life. Can you talk about that in a little bit greater detail? Okay. So I don't remember using the term identity fluidity, but I do think of identity as fluid. So if I were to talk about this in greater detail and probably linking it to theories of gender fluidity is probably where a lot of my ideas come from. Basically, identity fluidity is this ability to change how people see themselves, the world, and the way they move through it. So it is a sense of identity that is not bound by a single narrative, but it's a dynamic combination of past experiences, present awareness, and whatever you think your future possibilities might be. So it's moving beyond limited definitions for how we define ourselves and seeing ourselves as capable of growth and change. It's being able to see yourself as being able to move beyond limitations and being able to grow. So, for example, a lot of times we will have a lot of limiting beliefs around what we can and cannot do, why we can and cannot have things, butting up against the constraints of how we think our family members or our loved ones will respond to something we may need or want. And if it doesn't align with what we think they want, we will suppress that. And then those mechanisms of suppression become through the lens of energy healing, they become patterns of holding, and the body starts to constrict with that kind of energy. Suppression is a very constricted energy. And so over time, that pattern of constriction starts to become rigid. And this is when we start to have more like socially defined identities, right? So a socially defined identity is when who you are, who you think you are, is really bound by your context. And it's very contingent on relationships and your socialization, right? The culture and how people are socializing you. So that's what I mean by identity fluidity. Now, the second part of the question was talking about guards. So in my attachment 101 courses, for all four of them, anxious, avoidant, secure, and disorganized, there's a section where we talk about emotional boundaries. And I find the easiest way to talk about emotional boundaries is through the lens of sort of archetypal expressions. So one of those expressions is guards. And guards typically carry a shame wound around themes of emotional safety. And the guard can be expressed in anxious, avoidant, or disorganized ways. So anxious guards will offer connection outwardly, but they tend to hold it back internally. So for example, if an anxious guard has had a bad day, or let's say they're grieving, they might feel their pain, but then they push it aside, feeling ashamed for having a bad feeling. And instead now they downplay their emotions and they say something like, yeah, it's tough, but I'll get through it. How can I help you? Right? It's probably not nearly as bad as what you're going through. Tell me what you need. So we tend to give away what it is that we need, right? Almost as a way of receiving it vicariously. Then if we have an avoidant guard, let's say they have a bad day, and maybe they're grieving, maybe their pet died or something like that, and you want to offer help to them, they might say, you know what, I wish people would just leave me alone. That's life. There's no need to make a fuss about it, right? Then we have our disorganized, or sometimes called fearful avoidant guards. I refer to these folks as spice of lifers. And in the moment, they can respond like an anxious or an avoidant guard, but their motivations are coming from more complex and deeply rooted fear and feeling of shame. So an anxious guard could deflect support because they fear being seen as selfish or burdensome, but a disorganized guard deflects out of a fear of showing their vulnerability. To them, vulnerability is not just anxiety-inducing or uncomfortable, it is dangerous. Similarly, while an avoidant guard might leave others alone because they assume people want space to deal with their feelings, a disorganized guard might stay away or be distant because they fear someone else's pain is a trap. and they might end up becoming blamed or held responsible for solving their pain or a problem that they themselves did not create. So overall, guards struggle to ask for help. And even when they're in need, they tend to give away what it is that they truly want, or they find ways of just getting by without it, because it's better to get by on rations than to suffer with with window shopping, right? To suffer after wanting things you believe you can't fundamentally have, right? Does anyone relate to this? Can anyone relate to this experience of the guard? Let me know. And if you want to learn more about this, we do have a video on my YouTube channel. We have a playlist on this topic on my YouTube channel called Healing Toxic Shame with Anxious Avoidant Relationships. And we talk about a few other archetypes: adapters, navigators, and caretakers. We also talk about these kinds of archetypes again in the Attachment 101 courses. It's around lessons 2 or 3 when we're talking about emotional archetypes and emotional boundaries. If you don't have that course, we'll include a link to the quiz in the replay of this video. Okay, so let's just take a pause there. I can relate to anxious more than avoidant, but yes to the vulnerability. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we had another question here. And to paraphrase this one, how can I stop questioning my partner's affections even when they demonstrate care? There's a little more context. I'm dating someone who has a different communication style than me. He's very sweet, talks about the future, and is affectionate with words, does sweet things like brings me breakfast or things like that. He just seems not to be as much into messaging, or after work not checking the phone, or sometimes on weekends. But he sends me good morning messages every day at 7 a.m. religiously. This triggers me feeling like he doesn't care or that he's not that interested, even when he's showing me that he is. And I feel like this feeling is a pattern that I've had in my last relationship where I needed more texting. So I tend to think it's a me problem instead of something that will change with a different person. How would you handle this so I don't break up with him in my mind a million times because he didn't respond to me? Okay. So there are a couple layers to unpack here. The first thing I would look at is clarifying the relationship's natural growth trajectory, right? So you've highlighted that his communication style leans towards in-person affection and consistency with morning messages, but does not check his phone so much throughout the day, after work, or on weekends. So there are some questions that you might reflect on. So the first thing that comes up for me is, well, how long have you been dating? So in the early stages, morning messages and a surprise breakfast is really sweet and considerate. But if you've been together for a while and the relationship is otherwise progressing, absenteeism in the evenings or on the weekends is kind of suspicious and would require more investigation. If weekends are mostly radio silence and you don't see him, I think it's worth questioning what his availability truly is. The second thing, what is his level of commitment outside of romantic gestures? So sweet words and breakfast is nice, but do those actions line up with a true investment in growing a relationship? So if you two are exclusive and you are aligned with your long-term goals, some differences in texting frequency can ultimately be worked through. But if there's ambiguity in the relationship itself and your discomfort, and there is this ambiguity present, your discomfort might actually be pointing to something deeper than just texting habits, right? But maybe you have a history and habit of discounting your own feelings and intuition, so you wind up obsessing over text messaging as the problem, but it's actually pointing to something, to a deeper perception or intuition that you might have of the incongruencies in the relationship that are harder to articulate, right? The second thing to look at is managing your attachment triggers, right? So there is your emotional response. So feeling like he doesn't care when he doesn't text. That's a real and valid experience, even if logically you see that he's showing care in other ways. And that can be linked to your attachment style and past experiences, because while believing that someone cares is important, right? It's important to believe that that someone cares. It's not the end all be all, right? It's not more important than evaluating their capacity, their capability, and their authenticity in a relationship. So a couple of ways to work with that is to kind of think about reframing the story in your head. So instead of interpreting the lack of texting as he's not interested, you could play with the idea, well, he prefers to be fully present in his offline time, but he still prioritizes me in other ways, right? Meaning prefers to be fully present at his work throughout the day with whomever he's interacting with in real time and space, but I am being prioritized in other ways, right? The other thing, there is a way to play with communicating your needs and framing them without sounding like an accusation, right? And it depends on their attachment style. If you have someone who has more of an avoidant attachment style, you lean towards soft strategies. If they have more of an anxious attachment style, you lean towards safe strategies. If they're disorganized, you want to feel into, in the moment, are they pushing or pulling away? In which case you'll choose one or the other, right? So an example of this, just a generic example of this might be, well, I really appreciate the ways you show me that you care, and I'm working on understanding my own needs around communication. Sometimes a quick check-in after work or on the weekends would help me feel connected to you. Are you open to finding a rhythm that might work for both of us, right? The other thing you might want to practice is self-soothing when you start spiraling, right? And it's not dependent upon what you finding an answer, right? So if you find yourself breaking up with him in your mind a lot, just remind yourself, he has shown me care and consistency in other ways. My fear doesn't mean the reality is bad. I can tolerate discomfort and see how things play out. It is safe for me to ask for more time and attention with the intention to deepen the relationship. He has the choice to opt into it or not, and that will be important information which supports my overall goals and relationships in general, right? So sometimes when our attachment anxiety gets kicked up, well, what if he doesn't want to talk to me that much? Well, what if he sees me as a burden? Well, what if, what if, what if, what if? Don't ignore that information. You need that information because that's going to let you know, can this person show up with generosity to the relationship? Is this person going to make room for my needs? Is this person going to meet me halfway? Because it's not too much to ask for a check-in after work or on the weekends if you're growing a relationship with someone, and it's a little suspicious if they don't. Right? Just ask. And how they respond will be really good information for you. The other thing too is, of course, feeling triggered is a deeply embodied experience. It's your nervous system and your limbic brain turning on the alarm bells of the hippocampus, or the amygdala. So you want to try grounding techniques. Deep breathing is the quickest thing you can do. Box breathing, 4 counts in, hold 4 counts, 4 counts out. Get physically active in some way, go for a run. You want to maybe count the safety cues around you. Just start listing everything in your present inner and outer environment that indicates safety. Roof over my head, food in my belly, money in the bank, a friend that loves me, access to a phone where I can call a friend that loves me, a lock on the door, my body is healthy, right? Because sometimes a triggered response is you're a record stuck on repeat, right? You just got caught in the scratch. So you just gotta do sort of like a pattern interrupt. Okay. Even journaling, or setting a timer, set a timer. The other thing I like doing is because regulation is not just about forcing yourself to calm down. The other thing you could do is activate. So if you're feeling triggered, follow the trigger, lean in. Now, some people, unless they've developed some capacity for calming themselves down at will, you might want to learn those things first before doing this, but sometimes you just follow it. So when you feel triggered, it's a zap of energy. It just means you've had a massive flow of energy moving through you. So what if you exaggerate it? He hasn't texted me. He's going to leave me. He doesn't love me. He doesn't care. Exaggerate it. He doesn't text me. He's going to leave me. I'm going to be all alone. Like fall to the floor, start kicking and screaming. Ah, it's so alone. Right? Follow the energy. Play it out. And then you'll exhaust yourself. And then you're like, oh, that was just that scared part of me popping up. I see you. Okay, let's have the tantrum because you need that. And like someone who's parenting a child, you can go safely tantrum in your room until you're ready to have a conversation about what you're worried about. So give them the space to tantrum, do the tantrum, and then, okay, what's the next step? It's okay to do that, right? The more you do that, the less you'll need to do that, right? I'm glad you like that. So the goal here really isn't to force yourself to be okay with something that may not be working for you or to question yourself because logically it seems like he cares. So why am I so twisted up about this? I think it's a good question. Why am I so twisted up about this? Do I have a history of questioning and doubting my own intuition? So if I didn't question my own doubted intuition and I asked myself, why am I twisted up about this? Well, because if this were an evolving relationship, he'd be more available on the evenings and weekends. And if he's not, that's weird. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything that you should assume because of that, because I don't know. You got to ask. And then ask your intuition again. Does that answer seem on the up and up? Right? So I hope that helps. Hmm, good question. I'm glad that was helpful. Yeah. Okie dokie. Another question. 3 weeks post-conflict and my dismissive avoidant partner occasionally messages and then stops. How do I deal with that? So I don't know the background on this situation, but it sounds like perhaps the conflict was not fully addressed or repaired because the inconsistency in communication is likely a reflection of that. So when someone is more dismissive, avoidant in nature, they often withdraw as a way to regulate their emotions, especially after a conflict. But that doesn't mean that the issue has actually been resolved. It's just that they've kind of put distance between themselves and the discomfort that it created. So the best way to respond to inconsistency is really with consistency, right? So, and that's especially true um, if you want to communicate what you really want, need, and prioritize in a relationship. So, if regular, reliable communication after a conflict is important to you, and it should be, especially if you want the capacity to repair and be in a secure relationship, then you want to express that very clearly, not in a way that chases or pressures, but in a way that invites them into a deeper conversation about what happened and what you might need moving forward to entertain inconsistent communications, right? So in this case, a soft strategy might look like, hey, I've noticed that our communication has been a little sporadic since our conflict, and I wanted to check in. I care about us being able to work through things together, and that includes being a little more consistent in how we communicate, especially after a conflict. I want to understand where you are, where you're at with this. Do you feel like we really fully addressed what happened? And if they cannot respond to this, good information for you. Good information for you, right? And because something like this keeps the door open, you're being clear about what you want and value, and you're giving them the option to opt into it or not. But the reality is you can only extend the invitation, right? Invitation through inspiration. So they have to be willing to meet you there. If they continue to be inconsistent, again, good information about their capacity for repair and their emotional availability overall. So you want to pay attention to their actions, not just to their words. So maybe they say the things, they say the right things, and now give it time to show that they can put it into practice in real time. And if consistency matters to you, then you'll need to make decisions to honor your needs for consistency and not just wait around and hope that they'll change, right? Okay. I hope that's helpful. If my partner sees people treat me in a rude and or disrespectful way, but they treat him great, what's his responsibility to me there? Well, I think that you want a partner that is willing to protect you. I think you want a partner that's willing to stand up for you. I think you want a partner who can see through somebody's bullshit. If they're blowing smoke up his ass and then treating you like crap, then that person is some kind of opportunist, right? Or inconsistent in the way they treat people. So, what's your responsibility to hold him accountable to that, right? Not cool. And on some level, this is very primal. We want partners that protect us. I don't care what gender you are. And if a partner is not willing to do that, it's going to kick up all kinds of hurt, wounded stories. Exposed, unprotected, vulnerable, abandoned, left alone, unseen, disparaged. So address it. Don't let it just go unaddressed, right? Not cool. Okay. When do dismissive avoidant partners decide to come back? Okay, so this question was kind of worded in such a way that like there's a decision to go back. I don't think that avoidant partners decide to come back in kind of a linear and predictable way, maybe not in the way that this inquirer is assuming, because their attachment system is wired to prioritize emotional distance and independence above connection for survival, for self-preservation. And so this is oftentimes a largely unconscious thing until it becomes conscious. And that gets into the stages of readiness for change, right? When we are not aware that we're doing something, we just continue to do it. And then we sort of respond to our impulses, sort of like a ping pong being pushed around by the circumstances of life, right? And even coming back, if the breakup first happened to avoid discomfort, and then the distance starts to create discomfort, they're still just responding to discomfort, right? They reach out again because now they're lonely, they miss you, their esteem has been injured, blah, blah, blah. That's not like a decision. It's like they're still just responding to a defensive impulse and habitual mechanism of avoiding discomfort. So I just wanted to offer that as a definition for understanding what it means to decide to come back, right? So someone who's operating from a largely unconscious place, they might pull away when intimacy feels overwhelming or when conflict triggers feelings of being trapped, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they stop caring, right? So they might come back when they've had enough time and space to, let's call it, regulate themselves, meaning process their emotions internally, distance themselves far enough and long enough to feel like they've regained control again. And they feel like they won't be engulfed or subsumed or smothered by their fears within the relationship. At that point, they might reach out because they've reached that, what we'll call optimal proximity, that optimal distance, emotional and physical distance to feel safe again. Well, now it's safe enough to reach out again, right? And that kind of goes along with the next one, which is just that they may start to just miss you. They miss the connection. Um, Avoidant partners can suppress their needs for closeness, but that doesn't mean they don't have needs for closeness. It just takes them longer for them to recognize it and act on it, right? Um, you know, Oftentimes we don't realize what we have until we've lost it. Sometimes there can be external triggers. They might see something or someone or think of something that reminds them of you. They went somewhere, they heard a song, even in a moment of stress that you might have comforted them in the past, that can trigger some nostalgia, making them want to reconnect. But there can often be a level of fantasy here, the one that got away, which is a mechanism that just always keeps them chasing after something. But the reality is that when they were with that person, there was always a person before them that they were chasing. They were never fully present in the moment, right? So this is when you get those, hey, text messages or miss you out of the blue, right? And then you wind up having these deep emotional conversations and it goes nowhere. And then you don't hear from them for another weeks or months, years, right? Or they might feel like the coast is clear. Maybe they feel like it's gone on long enough. You no longer have expectations of them that maybe you had at the moment of the rupture or the breakup or the conflict. Maybe you've given up on those ideas. It's been enough time and space. So maybe now, if they reach out, it won't lead to the type of emotional intensity or the conversations that you had. Maybe they'll just try to pretend it didn't happen, and then you guys can reconnect on the level that they feel comfortable with. So they're just like dipping their toe in, right? So, I mean, at that point, the real question is, what are they coming back for? So, are they returning with a willingness to address what led to that conflict in the first place? Or they are just resurfacing because they want to feel comfortable? They want to feel comfortable again. Because keeping you here is comfortable. Here is not comfortable. But here requires some level of conflict repair, right? And that's not cool because I don't have the skills to conflict repair. So let me go back here until you stop expecting that. And then we can hang out here. And then I get to experience the things I like about this connection to you without experiencing the things I don't like about deeper connections to anyone, right? So if you want consistency, it's important to be clear about what you need. When they do come back, you can respond with an air of curiosity, right? Maybe you don't have to express your needs right away. You can ask a few questions to kind of suss out, are they actually open to connection here, or are they just looking for temporary reassurance before they pull away again, right? And then once you ask questions and you be curious, then you can tell them, well, this is what I'm looking for. And are you willing to try to meet me halfway, right? Just be really steady in what you value, be consistent in the face of their inconsistency, and if reliability and communication is something that you do value, prioritize, and want in a relationship, you will need to be able to voice that, give them the option to opt into it or not. And if they cannot, good information for you, right? Thanks for telling me now. Okay. Is it okay to pretend nothing happened? No. No, it's not. Not okay. Nope. And if you're pretending nothing happened, there's a fear you're avoiding. And unless you address what happened, the fear will never be satisfied. So it will continue to fuel all the stories you've got going on that keep you chasing after someone who can't talk about things directly. And if you can't talk about things directly either, that's why you're chasing someone who can't talk about things directly. They're not going to, unless you invite that direct conversation, it's not going to happen. And so you keep operating from a place of fear, right? But what if I bring it up and they disappear? Good. Bye-bye. Next. I'm glad I weeded that out quick, right? Not going to spend any more of my time, energy, and effort on something that I don't need to, that isn't sending me in the direction of my soul's alignment, because my deep desire for love and connection is there, and I'm not going to ignore it anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. How are we doing? How are we doing in here? Is any of this resonating? What's coming up? My partner is consistent in not wanting to change, to make things different. He wants to keep things the same as he feels there's nothing wrong with the way he is or the way we are. I felt this emotional distance our whole marriage. I feel like he's avoidant. Is that wrong? So you have to tell me, what do you mean? What's wrong there? What's wrong? What's wrong? I mean, when you stay with someone who's unwilling to change, what does that say about us? We're kind of unwilling to change too, right? So, gotta think about that. Is he avoidant? Well, so I've never met this person, so I can't tell you if he's avoidant or not. But people who typically avoid emotional connection, um, and dismiss when you bring up that something's not working for you, that's an avoidant thing to do, for sure. Yeah. Okay. We had another question. I'm currently in the no contact rule with my partner. How will I know when it is safe to reach out to him in a healthy way? Okay. So the key to knowing when it is safe to reach out after a period of no contact is checking in with yourself first, not them, right? You want to consider whether you are ready to reach out. And how do you know if you're ready? Well, you want to ask yourself, have I gained clarity on what I really want? Are you reaching out because you genuinely want to rebuild something healthier or because you're just feeling anxious about the silence and you just don't want to be without them, right? Do you have a clear idea of what you need from a relationship in general moving forward and what their capacities are to actually meet you there? Secondly, think about your own physical safety, well-being, and situation. So, do you feel like you have the capacity to emotionally regulate yourself? Again, regulation is not about calming yourself. It's about being a rubber band and expanding wide enough to hold the big feelings that you might have, whether they are comfortable or uncomfortable feelings, and being able to be with them without allowing those feelings to impulsively compel you, right? So if you're feeling like you're extremely tender, highly reactive, hoping for a specific response, and only that is going to ease your emotions, it might be a little too soon. Sort of like going through withdrawals from alcohol and then convincing yourself, well, if I just have a sip, that will calm me down, right? Because you want to get to a place where you're beyond those withdrawals and you're reaching out from a place of stability, not out of desperation, fear of loss, or anxiety avoidance. And then you want to ask yourself, am I prepared for any outcome? So if they don't respond, are you going to be able to handle that without spiraling? So is the reaching out now coming from a place of self-advocacy no matter the outcome? Or is it still coming out from a place of trying to elicit a response from them? Of course, you can want a response. Who doesn't want to be responded to? But do you need it? Are you reaching out because you need it? Or are you reaching out because there's something in your inner narrative and story that otherwise has held you back from speaking, right? Unless there is that response, unless you have that permission. In which case, reaching out because now you're giving yourself permission to speak and to ask and to extend the invitation, whether or not they take it. That is a process of stepping into your own power, right? And then let's say they do respond. Do you know what kind of conversation you want to have? Do you know the direction you want it to go in? Because sometimes they're going to try to derail you. They're not the one reaching out to you. So be aware of where you want it to go, right? And so once you feel clear and grounded, just observe their behavior. Did they make any effort to respond? And if they do, have they demonstrated any kind of self-reflection or growth since the last time you spoke, right? So you can send a simple message like, hey, I hope you're doing well. Wanted to check in and see how you've been. That kind of keeps it light and opens it up for allowing them to respond in their own time and space without feeling cornered. But really, the most important part here is to be honest with yourself about their response. If they're still distant, inconsistent, or unwilling to have a meaningful conversation, that's really your answer. And you don't need to chase them down. You need someone who is willing to meet you where you're at. Okay. Okay. What have we got? We are both fearful, so it was difficult to be open of vulnerability in a stage to begin to know each other. So Sylvia, I'm going to address your question. I have your question here on my list, so we're definitely going to get to your question. Can I help my avoidant partner be curious about me? He always seems completely disinterested, but he loves me and we've been together for 30 years. So, I mean, that's something I would highly recommend speaking to a marriage counselor about. If you've been together 30 years and you feel like your partner's disinterested in you, but he loves me, it sounds like you don't feel loved. Disinterest suggests a lack of love. So it sounds like there is a discrepancy between what you are observing and what you're feeling. I'm secure but can feel unseen and unloved and lonely because of lack of curiosity. Yeah, because that's how normal people feel when someone's not interested in you and acts like they're not interested in you and then says they love you. Bullshit. Show me, right? So that's a big problem. And that's why I say you got to speak to someone about that. It's a big problem. Okay. And you're not weird. I mean, any normal, secure person would feel unseen and unloved if the person you've been with for 30 years acts like they're not interested in you. Not okay. Not okay. Right? Sounds like you're at a threshold for change. I encourage you to cross that threshold. Never too late. Okay. I've read of a 3-month rule. Oh, that's the one we just, no, that's not the one we did. Okay. I've read of a 3-month rule after the avoidant discard. Is there any merit to that? Okay. So I'm assuming this is the so-called 3-month rule after an avoidant discard. This idea of is that avoidants tend to re-engage after enough time has passed for them, as we talked about before, after enough time has passed for them to regulate their emotions, suppress any discomfort, and they start missing that connection. So it's not a hard and fast rule. Our attachment mechanisms usually don't get turned on in earnest until 3 to 6 months after you've started getting to know someone. And sometimes what will happen is an avoidant partner will do something to end or rupture the relationship around 3 to 6 months to reset it because they're good at the honeymoon phase, but they're not so good at a mature love phase. So sometimes that might be some of what you're observing. I don't think it's because of some kind of arbitrary or intentional timeline. I do think it could be because of whatever time and distance they need to feel safer in order to reconnect. Again, these are just these are just anecdotal things that we observe. It's not a hard and fast rule. In some cases, it could be longer, it could be shorter. In some cases, that's not actually what's going on at all. So again, it's on a case by case basis. But, the real question isn't when will they come back, but why are they coming back, right? We talked about this in terms of levels of awareness. Are they deciding to come back because they are aware that some kind of unconscious decision making was going on when they walked away, and now they want to make a conscious decision to come back and work through what came up for them or what triggered them in that moment, right? Or are they, again, unconsciously reaching out because they're unconsciously trying to avoid the discomfort they now feel in your absence, right? So if they return without addressing any of the underlying issues that caused the rupture, then the cycle is just likely to repeat, okay? Um, because they will tend to reappear when they feel in control again, but that doesn't mean that they're ready for deeper intimacy or change. So rather than focusing on some kind of arbitrary time frame, it's really more useful to ask yourself, has anything shifted that would make the dynamic healthier if they did return? And I welcomed them back. Are they capable of real repair and growth, or do they just miss the comfort and the connection without any willingness to truly sustain it, right? So a 3-month gap could give them time and space, and it also gives you time and space to reflect on what you really want. Is that consistency? Is that emotional safety? And is that mutual investment? And if so, and those things were not present before, then the return does not change that, right? So what matters is whether they show up differently and whether you're still available to explore if it could evolve into something new and different, right? Hope that helps. Um, okay. So we've got 346. I'm going to jump to your question, Sylvia. Okay, so I'm going to rephrase this. How can I connect with a romantic interest who's been abroad for months? We haven't been in contact, and both of us seem to have fearful avoidant tendencies. He was the more avoidant one, often the runner. We were in a virtual connection for about a year, living in different countries, and only met once in person during a group encounter. During that meeting, he showed strong romantic interest, openly expressing that he liked me, but just 2 days later, he suddenly pulled away, almost as if he was running from something. He even said in frustration that he had done everything right, which caught me off guard. After that, we maintained some WhatsApp contact, but I felt like I was being breadcrumbed. The last real conversation happened in a call that I initiated, hoping to clear up misunderstandings. I was coming from a place of insecurity, which put him on the defense. I used the Spanish word for bond to express that I valued our connection, but he took it as if I was claiming him, insisting we were just friends. He called me a special friend, one of the few people he trusts, but then downplayed any romantic interactions, which shocked me. Everything fell apart from there. He ended the conversation abruptly, saying he had to wash dishes before hanging up. I asked how we could remain friends without making things personal, and he said that was a whole topic for another time. Since then, 7 months now, we have not spoken at all. I feel like I've lost not just a dear friend, but potentially a life partner. Okay. So I hear how much this connection means to you and how painful it feels to have lost not just a romantic possibility, but what felt like a meaningful friendship. And so long distance relationships, especially those that are built primarily in virtual spaces, can create a deep sense of emotional connection while lacking real world dynamics that test and solidify relationships. So it sounds like from the start, there were some signs that he was not genuinely available for a deeper real world commitment. So I want to point out the signs that you want to look for, okay? Because I I want to put a pin in this bubble you have, this idealized bubble you have, that he could have been a potentially lifelong partner and he was a dear friend, okay? He was someone who was willing to connect in a virtual space where a lot of fantasy can fill up the space between you and you can turn him into a dear friend through the constraints of your own imagination. But a dear friend shows up in the real world, right? So here are some signs that you want to look out for, especially if you find that you are inclined towards long distance connections. Okay. So he expressed romantic interest, but then pulled away after meeting you in person and only met you in a group setting, not even a private setting. And then it just suggests that there's this level of fantasy and connection, but not real intimacy. And then his reaction of distancing himself right after showing interest indicates that emotional unavailability, unpredictability, and fears of deeper commitment. Instead of engaging in meaningful or reciprocal contact, he kept the connection at a low level, giving you just enough to prevent a full break in emotional connection, but avoiding a true commitment. It doesn't sound like there were any plans to meet individually outside of this group meeting, and that's a long time to go. Instead of appreciating your desire to value the relationship, he reacted as if you were making a claim on him, which was an extreme response. Someone who really values you and your friendship isn't going to be defensive about expressing mutual care and respect, whether it's romantic or otherwise. When someone shows affection and interest but then later denies it, it's usually a sign of emotional confusion, inconsistency, or even gaslighting and manipulation. Ending the conversation over a trivial excuse and then not contacting you for 7 months is inconsiderate, shows an unwillingness to engage in emotional depth or providing any kind of resolution. Instead of giving a clear answer about your connection and what you were perceiving, he dismissed your intuition, postponed the conversation indefinitely, and this is very much common behavior to escape accountability. And if a person truly values you as a friend or a potential partner, they would make an effort to reach out to clarify or to reconnect in some way, and his silence speaks volumes, start to end. Okay. Living in different countries, why? Why are you trying to have this kind of connection with someone living in a different country? And even if they're living in a different country, sparking up that kind of emotional connection without a plan to see each other with some kind of regularity keeps the relationship in a fantasy space. It's not grounded. which also suggests your energy for both of you most likely is up in your heads because the body is unsafe. So even if you vision some kind of emotional connection in future together, there's no way for that vision to become embodied in the real world. So it's comfortable to stay there. So this is why you got to ask yourself, why am I entertaining this? Why am I aching for him when there's actually not a lot to hold on to? So a couple of things I want to suggest here to look for if you're going to give this much time, energy, and emotional effort to someone, even long distance, right? You want to look for someone who genuinely wants to be in your life, who will show up for you, who communicates clearly, consistency, and regularly, and invests in getting to know you beyond surface level interactions, wants to spend private time with you, wants to be in your physical presence, even if you live in another country, has a plan to save up money to visit you for a solid week so you can get to know each other in a real time and space. Someone who can handle difficult conversations without getting defensive, gaslighting you, or shutting you down. You want to be, if you're looking for something serious, you want to pay attention to whether they are truly working towards something real, not just enjoying the fantasy of a long distance digital connection. So it's easy to say the right things at the right moment if it's always over text, Zoom, or phone call. But a real commitment, and certainly the possibility of a lifelong commitment, is when someone demonstrates their affection through their actions. So if a person is always avoiding some kind of difficult conversation, it's a sign that they're not really capable of a healthy relationship yet. And if a connection remains mostly virtual with no clear steps towards some kind of real world manifestation, then it's likely the distance is what they prefer. And if you realize you want more connection, and it may be, maybe you sparked up a conversation with them and you entertained this because that's what you wanted at first, because it was you who thought that was pretty safe. But now clearly you're upset because you want more. And that's good. That may have been the whole point of the relationship, is to show you you're ready for more, right? And so it is understandable that this relationship felt meaningful, but it seems like it was sustained by an emotional intensity that can be created over distances rather than a solid foundation for a real partnership. And so instead of wondering what you lost, why you lost it, how can you reconnect, I might invite you to ask yourself, if I am waiting around for someone who is unchanging, uncommunicative, unwilling to grow, what does that say about me? And this is not about shame. This is not about shaming you. It is about inviting you to look at the lesson the universe is giving you by sending this person to you, by sparking the love that you feel for this person. What is that love showing you? So this person might be mirroring back to you a part of you that is afraid of changing or of resisting your own growth in your love life. And so when we find ourselves fixated on an unavailable partner, it's because a part of us may feel safer in the experience of longing because it's familiar than we are in the experience of receiving love, of truly, deeply, and honestly receiving love. And so that can really be a defensive strategy. It's a way to stay preoccupied with someone else's actions so that we don't risk emotional vulnerability with someone who's present there with you and actually reciprocates. But I believe that you're here asking these questions and you're aching and you're longing and you're upset in this disconnection is good, because it's showing you what you really want. And it means that there is another part of you that is ready to break free of this pattern, that's done with it. Why am I accepting this? And maybe that part is whispering, or we might even argue screaming at you, to let go of those old patterns and step into a more expansive, self-honoring experience of love. So instead of focusing on what this person is or not doing and trying to negotiate some way to strategize getting them back in your life, I would offer the question, if I continue to pursue someone who keeps rejecting me, how do I continue to reject myself? And so the moment that you start to redirect that energy back towards yourself, and so how might I stop rejecting myself? Right? Means turning towards your own value and worth, being honest about what you really need and want, choosing partners that meet those needs and wants, right? Once you start making those decisions for yourself, the universe is just going to start sending you new relationships, new experiences, new opportunities that will align with those desires. And you really deserve to be with someone who's emotionally available, willing to grow, that wants all the love that you want to give and receive, right? Because you are capable of creating those real, long, and lasting connections, even if you have had fearful avoidance in the past. Just means you haven't had the models for it yet, but you have the capacity to imagine that and create that model for yourself moving forward. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. We had another question. Is it common for dismissive avoidant partners to have substance use issues? Do you ever see them recover from both substance use and dismissive avoidance? My girlfriend is both avoidant and alcoholic. It feels like a winless war against a two-headed monster, unfortunately. Okay. So it is quite common for dismissive avoidant partners, and I would add actually people who are severely insecure, to struggle with substance use issues. And the relationship that they have with alcohol, or let's say any other kind of substance, is paradoxical. So, on the one hand, alcohol serves to numb the emotions and suppress anxiety, which helps them to avoid the discomfort or the vulnerability they might feel in connection. But on the other hand, alcohol can also disinhibit them just enough to allow suppressed parts of themselves to pop up, including parts that do crave connection. And so, this is why you might notice, this is hypothetical because I don't know your situation, but this is why, for example, you might notice your girlfriend becoming more affectionate or emotionally open when they drink. And then it allows her to bypass the part of herself that's afraid of intimacy. But then the closeness starts to trigger anxiety again. And so now she turns to alcohol to suppress those feelings, creating a cycle of avoidance and escape. So it's kind of like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're craving that connection, but fearing it at the same time. And the alcohol becomes this kind of tool to facilitate both extremes. And so the good news is that both substance use and dismissive avoidance, I believe, can be healed, and even simultaneously, because they stem from the same root cause, and that is attachment wounding, which is ultimately a self wound. We're not connected to the true essence of our spiritual self. So I talk a lot more about this explicitly in my Healing Attachment Wounds course. I think it's the second lesson is all about how addiction and attachment are connected and deeply intertwined, specifically through complicated grief. It's basically the grief of not just losing something you had, but of mourning something you never had and now believe you never will. So normal grief is about mourning the loss of something you did have, and complicated grief is grieving the absence of something you feel you were entitled to at one point, but now you believe you'll never get it, and so parts of yourself are somehow lost and unrecoverable. So a lot of folks that have dismissive avoidance, they have a core wound around believing that parts of themselves are incomplete, unrecoverable, because they never really achieved emotional safety and love or had that deep connection that they longed for. And so, as a survival mechanism, they're disconnecting from their emotions internally, as well as disconnect from things externally that would stimulate those emotions to avoid the pain of that perceived loss. But this isn't true. When we turn towards healing, and I define this as turning towards soul-centered security, which means we are healing through a transcendent experience rather than chasing down secure partners as if there's some kind of like golden ticket, right, or miracle drug. We stop needing to escape our own emotions. We learn how to bring these, let's call them inner children or wounded parts of ourselves into balance, and we help the emotional body, the energy body, move out of a state of fear and constriction into a state of alignment with the mind and body. So this is why healing attachment wounds often leads to the healing of addiction issues as well, because they are different expressions of the same core wound and underlying pain. So I completely understand why this can feel like a frightening two-headed monster. It's exhausting to be in a relationship with someone who wants connection and then denies it simultaneously. And if you're in that dynamic, it's important to recognize that you cannot force someone to heal before they are ready and wanting to. But you can decide what is best for your own well-being, and you can decide if the relationship is sustainable for you, right? Um, and then you have to honor that. And when you do that, you become a model for a healthier way to relate. And then you become inspiring, and that inspiration is an invitation, and they will respond to that invitation or not. And then you'll have all the information that you need. You'll have the clarity you need to move forward. Okay. All right. So I think that's all the questions we have, or the time we have for today. There's a couple questions we didn't get to. Um, I think how to tell them they're avoidant, and how to address passive aggression in the workplace. So those we will come back to. Those will be top of the list the next time we meet. All right. So thank you, everyone. I so appreciate you joining me here today. Again, the replay will be inside your student dashboard under the live events and replays module. We also have them inside of our student Facebook group, pinned typically to the featured section. And if you want to submit a question before next week, please feel free to type it in the Google form. Again, link to that's accessible inside your student dashboard in our email announcements. And I look forward to connecting with you again next week. Thank you all for joining me here today. I so appreciate you. I'm glad those were clarifying. Thank you. Bye. Enjoy your weekend.